In this mini lecture, we're going to be looking at Porter's 5 forces. So Porter's 5 forces looks at the 5 forces that have the biggest impact on an industry. And so when we look at Porter's 5 forces, we're really looking at this from an industry perspective. And those 5 forces include rivalry among competing firms, potential entry of new competitors, potential development of substitute products, bargaining power of suppliers, and bargaining power of consumers. So when we use the 5 forces model, we're trying to identify key aspects or elements of each of these forces that might impact a firm, evaluate how strong or important each element is, and decide whether the strength of each element is worth the firm entering or even staying in the industry. So let's first look at rivalry among competing firms. This is the most powerful of the 5 forces, and it really looks at the competitive advantages of strategies over other firms. And so if there are a lot of competitors and competition is really fierce, we would say that that's a high rivalry among competing firms. If there aren't a lot of competitors, maybe it's a oligopoly, um, then that's not going to be a very strong force, making it potentially more attractive to enter or stay in that industry. All right. So some conditions that cause high rivalry, high number of competing firms, when competing firms are of similar size, when competing firms have similar capabilities, when demand for an industry's products is falling, when products or services prices are falling, when consumers can easily switch brands, when barriers to leave the market are high, when barriers to enter the market are low. We'll talk about these a little bit in a minute. High fixed costs if your product is perishable, if your rivals have extra capacity to create more, consumer demand is declining. If rivals have excess inventories, they might be able to sell cheaper. If your rivals sell similar products and services, and if mergers are common in the industry. The next one we're going to look at is the potential entry of new competitors. This is obviously a, very, this is obviously really important because um, the easier it is to enter an industry, the more likely you're going to have more competition. So when we look at the potential of entry of new competitors, we want to look at how easy is it for competition or for a company to enter this industry. And some of the things that play a role in this are the quality of your products, how you're priced, and your marketing. All right, so some barriers to entry include needing to gain economies of scale quickly, meaning you need to be able to produce efficiently in a rather short amount of time and be able to sell your items relatively quickly. If you need to gain technology or you need to have some specialized knowledge, lack of experience, strong customer loyalty is a barrier to entry. So if there's a company that has a really strong brand, that can be a big barrier. Strong brand preferences, large capital requirements, meaning it takes a lot of money to enter the market, or lack of adequate distribution channels. So getting your product or service to customers when that's difficult, that can make your barrier to entry high. Some other barriers to entry are government regulations, tariffs, lack of access to the materials you need, patents, undesirable locations, attacks by other firms, or maybe the market is just saturated. So these would all might all indicate that the barriers to entry of that industry are high, making it not as attractive to enter. All right, potential development of substitute products. It really looks at are there other competing products and services out there? They don't have to be exactly the same. So, for example, if you're a athletic shoe company, um, other types of shoes might be a potential substitute as well. So the pressure or the develop, excuse me, the The threat of substitutes, that barrier or that force is high, or pressure increases when price of substitutes decreases. So to switch um, to a different product or service that's similar, if their prices are lower, that might make the potential development of substitute products high. Or if consumer switching costs decrease, so it's relatively easy to switch between brands or products or services, then that force is higher. Okay, bargaining power of suppliers looks at how much control our suppliers have over our prices. And so this increases when there are fewer suppliers, meaning they have more advantage. They can kind of set their prices at what they want. There's fewer substitutes, or the cost of switching materials or switching suppliers is high. And so sometimes what companies do to decrease this force a little bit is called backward integration, where they actually gain control or buy their suppliers so that they control their supply chain. The bargaining power of consumers really looks at, is really determined pretty largely on competition. So if customers are, excuse me, if customers are concentrated or in volume, then this affects the intensity of competition. So consumer power is higher where products are much more standardized or they don't differ much. And again, if those switching costs are relatively easy, then the bargaining power of consumers is going to be relatively high. If even if there's a lot of brand loyalty, then that can somewhat impact this as well. So if there's a lot of options for consumers and they don't have, and there's a lot of um, and they don't have high switching costs, then you're going to have a higher bargaining power of consumers. All right, so consumers gain bargaining power when they can easily switch between products or services, if the buyers are particularly important, if consumer demand is decreasing, then buyers have more power. If buyers are informed about the seller's products, prices, and costs, and if the buyer has discretion over when and whether they purchase the product. All right, that's an overview of Porter's 5 forces. We've kind of talked about each of the forces. Now there is a video that I would like you to watch about Porter's 5 forces as it applies to the airline industry. And I think that will really help you to get a grasp on how you apply this analysis to determine if an industry is attractive or not. All right, contact me with questions if you do have any. Thanks.